Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rob McNamara, and I'm the Assistant General Secretary here with IFUT in the IFUT head office. And we're joined by my colleague David, who is going to go through a presentation on the matters surrounding the national ballot regarding the fact that we haven't been able to agree a successor public service pay agreement. And we're going to have contributions from my colleague Miriam Hamilton, the Deputy General Secretary, and Frank Jones, the General Secretary. And in that regard, I'll ask Frank to welcome you all to this webinar session.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks everyone for coming along. And there's still people coming in. It seems to be a fairly big session, and that's great. The purpose of this afternoon's presentation is just to inform all the members where we stand in relation to the public sector pay agreement, where we want to be and how we want to get there with yourselves over the coming weeks. The starting point, as David will explain, is very straightforward. We're out of agreement and we don't have a current public sector agreement, and there is no successor agreement available available right now for us. So we'll run through that just as Rob has said, just for the last few that just came in the last couple of minutes. This session is being recorded, but only the presentation end of the session has been recorded. The questions and answer session towards the end of the session will not be recorded. And we expect this to take between 40 and 50 minutes. So thanks for that, Rob, and back to yourself.
Thank you, Frank. So without further ado, I'd ask my colleague David to start taking you through the presentation, and as I said, we will pause in different places for contributions from both Frank and Miriam.
Thank you, Robert, and good afternoon all. So just to provide some context following on from Frank's initial overview, the reason that we are here today at this meeting and in this place generally is that the Public Service Pay Agreement expired on the 30th of June 2026, at which point there has been no successor agreement reached, and by analogy there's been no agreed pay settlement beyond June 2026. In addition to that, a number of outstanding commitments remain undelivered, which we will provide you with more detail on in due course. So at this point in time, our members are now being asked, in line with the democratic process within IFUT, to decide on how to respond. In relation to the question of why IFUT are now conducting this ballot, the reason for it is that it is about fair pay and securing a successor agreement for the protection of living standards, delivery of local bargaining commitments, which is another matter we'll return to in more detail in due course, protection of terms and conditions of employment. Industrial action in this and in all scenarios remains a last resort. It's not a decision that was taken lightly, and it's not a decision that our national executive took lightly, but it is necessary given the tenor and the pace of engagement by the government and the lack of rigour in engaging with us to bring about a resolution. We want a negotiated settlement. That remains our position. We stand ready to engage meaningfully to bring that about. But in and of itself, hope is not a strategy. And this is why we have taken, in conjunction with the other public service unions, to take this necessary step to bring our industrial strength to bear on the situation with a view to progressing matters.
Thanks, David. Frank, a good point maybe to jump in here and advise maybe members of, I suppose, the background and a bit more detail in terms of the Public Services Committee of the Irish Congress of Trades Unions decision to ballot for industrial action. Not a decision I'd imagine they've taken lightly. So could you dive into the background a little bit more in terms of what decisions, what was considered in terms of making that big decision, and yeah, some more of the context, really, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. In Congress of Trade Unions, there's a Public Services Committee of which we are members. There's 19 unions who have members in the public sector, all of whom all 19 are represented on the Public Services Committee, who the officers of that committee, there's 4 officers, they negotiate the agreement on the instruction and the advice from ourselves as representatives. 3 of us from head office are on that committee. And generally, in the lifetime of the public sector agreements heretofore, with one slight exception, the successor agreements, negotiations commence on the successor agreements about 6 months out from the finish. This didn't happen this time. There was a few attempts on our side to engage with the government side, the employer side, and it wasn't until about May that we met. That the officers met with the government to initiate discussions. Unfortunately, it became very apparent very quickly that what the employer side wanted to talk about was change and what they would get for a future increase in the lifetime of the next agreement. However, our position was very, very straightforward going into the talks, and that was that we were in there to talk about protecting members' incomes and living standards. That's what we were there to talk about. And we wanted to talk about, percentage pay increases and all of that sort of stuff. And the employer's position, the government's position was, we'll do that at the end of the talks. We want to see how much we can get from you first. The officers came back to ourselves on the committee, and we said, no, that wasn't what we were in there for. So that's what essentially has started this process. We do want to, and David has said it at least twice now, I mean, our purpose is to meaningfully engage. And that's what this process is about, is to put pressure on the other side to meaningfully engage, because there hasn't been that such engagement to date.
Thanks, Frank. Maybe 2 other questions kind of spring to mind in that regard. So you referred to the 19 other unions. Are they taking similar actions, and are they at a similar stage to ourselves? And then maybe a second question is there been a lot of speculation that the government has been using, I suppose, the budget as maybe some sort of a staging post where they get to the budget and then they say, look, aren't we great? Didn't we give you loads of tax breaks? Could you address those 2 points for us and maybe kind of fill members in on those maybe perspectives?
Yeah, the first thing is just to put some numbers on it. In the 19 unions affiliated to this Public Services Committee, we represent about 380,000 employees. There's 380,000 or so public sector workers, which is 15% of the entire workforce. So, it's not an insignificant group. And David will make reference to the fact that, we're not just negotiating for ourselves, everyone else is watching. But on the specific point about the government perhaps attempting to use Budget 2027 as some sort of means of addressing our claim, yes, that fear is real. And precisely what we believe that their plan is to use any indexation of the tax bands and then tell us that was something done for the public sector, and that has to be worth 2% of your next claim or something along those lines. This is not an era of social partnership. This is just collective bargaining. That's what it is. We're here mandated by our members to get them a new pay deal. We're not in there to look for some of the ancillary benefits and great things that went with social partnership. The government pulled the rug out in social partnership a number of years ago. So this is just collective bargaining. So yes, that fear is real, that there is an effort to delay the negotiations to offset our claim with budgetary gifts.
Perhaps making this all the more important to send a clear message to the government. David, back to yourself to take us through some more slides.
Just related, I suppose, to some of that discourse and conversations around budgetary matters and future potential indexation of tax. Ultimately, a very real issue in these discussions is the cost of living. Now, insofar as it's necessary for an IFUT representative to kind of give an update on cost of living, or even to tell you why it matters, the reality of the situation is that inflation has outpaced recent pay increases, and the real value of members' pay has fallen. And all this arises to the backdrop of rising housing costs, childcare, transport, and a whole amalgam of different matters, continuing to put pressure on staff, despite the pay increases that have been secured under recent public service agreements. The reality of it is inflation has outpaced these increases, with the cumulative gap we estimate to be something in the order of between 4 and 5%, the net effect of which is the real value of public service pay has fallen. And even with the scheduled increases for 26, inflation is expected to be significantly higher, and unless it is addressed in a successor agreement, members will continue to lose purchasing power. And notwithstanding those points in general on the cost of living and the general round increases, this ballot is also about more than just pay. We represent the higher education sector, which has a number of bespoke issues that are unique to our area, be you a researcher or lecturer or other grade. We seek better career structures. We seek more secure employment and fair treatment for all academic staff and respect for collective bargaining. The fact of the matter remains that many early career academics and researchers remain on fixed term or hourly paid contracts, highlighting why our local bargaining claim seeks more secure pathways. And our 2023 survey on precarious employment showed that almost 1 in 3 respondents were employed on a fixed term or hourly paid contract, and tackling precarious employment is ultimately central to our local bargaining claim. In terms of the way of an overview of that, to explain what we mean in particular by the local bargaining aspect of the matter, Public Service Pay Agreement provided a 3% fiscal envelope for local bargaining provision, which was comprised of 1% under the expired agreement and 2% under the successor agreement. What we seek to be addressed through that process is better career pathways for researchers, fair treatment for hourly paid teaching staff, tackling precarious employment, bringing about greater employment security, crucially, and linked to the proposition of respect for collective bargaining, delivery of commitments already made. And ultimately, we say researchers make a vital contribution to universities, but too many continue to work without clear career pathways or long-term employment and security, and the amalgam of these matters constitute exploitative and outdated practices that must be eradicated.
David, thanks for that. Miriam, could I bring you in on this part, the local bargaining claim, essentially? I know that IFUT has done a lot of work on formulating their local bargaining claim. Can you give us the background to the claim? I suppose where it came from, who was consulted, what are the constituent parts of the claim, how those negotiations have progressed, and I suppose, and where those negotiations are ultimately at this particular point.
No problem. David finished there at the end of that slide by saying that there are exploitative, precarious employment practices that must be challenged. But the difficulty we've had for a long number of years is that we have faced opposition and resistance from employers when we tried to negotiate and agree fairer employment practices for some grades, groups or categories, because the employer would say that they were cost increasing claims, and cost increasing claims were prohibited by pay agreements. So this agreement allowed for local bargaining, which meant that in addition to the pay increases that applied to all of our members, we were also then able to pursue other issues that had a cost, but we were able to finally address those. We had, as David mentioned, just completed a fairly large report in IFUT, focusing on the different aspects of precarious employment that affects our members. We spend every day of the week representing members on fixed term contracts, term time contracts, hourly contracts. So we had a good understanding of the realities facing many of our members. And then the branches similarly gave us some feedback. So between our own direct experience dealing with members, the branch experience of engaging with members, and feedback through an established IFUT precarious employment campaign steering group, and with our executive, we engaged with as many members as we could to come up with our priorities the main challenges that our members face in the sector and what we believe is a fair and reasonable outcome for those workers. We then engaged with our two sister unions, SIP2 and Unite. While IFUT is the largest union that represents academic staff across the higher education sector, SIP2 and Unite do have some members, and we didn't want the unionised voice to be fragmented in any way. We wanted to speak with one loud, cohesive voice, and we're delighted that SIP2 and Unite were very happy to support the IFUT claims on this one, because their members similarly experience the same realities. So we lodged one comprehensive document that had many different elements contained in it with the Department of Further and Higher Education and the sectoral employers. And it included things like a conversion scheme for hourly paid lecturing staff. So these are staff who have been lecturing for years and contribute a steady high level of teaching hours. So there's a demonstrable need for them, and programmes rely on them year after year. And it was a way that those people could be converted onto a salaried arrangement, giving them greater job security and earning security. We wanted to look at people who were on term time contracts, which ended at the end of the teaching term, but there was a need for those people to contribute to the work of the university and with student engagement and repeats and exam boards, etc., outside of that, and it wasn't reflected in the contract. We wanted to look at the CUSH agreement, which currently allows for our lecturing members to apply for greater job security after 2 years on fixed term contracts. But people like teaching fellows and researchers have to wait currently 4 years. So we wanted to review that and other operational matters with the CUSH agreement to make it fairer and to involve more people in its protections. And for researchers in particular, we feel that the current research salary scales and the research career framework doesn't deliver a fair arrangement for researchers. While there are different grades of researchers in the research career framework, there's no pathway to progress through those grades. There's no recognition of prior service. We represent far too many people who go back time and time again to point one on the postdoc salary scale, and all of their previous years of service and experience are disregarded. And there are other elements, one of them that maybe is relevant to some people on this call. There is a relatively new grade of teaching fellow in existence in higher education, not across higher education, but there isn't necessarily an agreement on the appropriate salary, the job description, the fair use of teaching fellows. So that was an element as well. I'm sure I'm forgetting others, but it was, as I say, a very, very comprehensive document. Mm-hmm. When we tried to progress negotiations with the department and the sectoral employers, we then were met with a number of nonsensical and sometimes offensive retorts. Everything from they don't accept there's a problem with precarious employment in higher education and therefore they don't need to engage in any negotiations aimed at tackling precarious employment, to the employers saying that what the unions are trying to achieve is too ambitious and therefore too difficult, and it would take too long. But for our members who live on these arrangements, we've no option other than to tackle them, regardless of how difficult or how long it's going to take. So we've done everything we could do. We tried to utilise the last agreement to the best of our ability, but ultimately we're going to be in the Labour Court on the 1st of September because of the refusal of the employers to engage. And because any successor agreement could potentially include a pay envelope of up to 2% of the value of payroll to deal with some of these elements, it's really important to us that we reach a successor agreement and that the commitments previously made to our members under local bargaining are delivered.
Thanks very much for that comprehensive response. Miriam, back to you, David.
Just in terms of following on of the detail that Miriam has provided in relation to the local bargaining and the constituent elements thereof, ultimately in terms of protecting terms and conditions, we are of the view that change should be negotiated, as part of which members should be consulted, and workplaces and work practices ultimately should not be changed unilaterally. Collective bargaining must be respected, and good faith engagement on the management side is urgently needed. Throughout the course of these discussions, we've participated constructively through the Public Services Committee of IFUT. We've engaged in good faith. However, despite that, significant issues along the lines Miriam has set out for us remain unresolved. From our perspective, the government have not yet put forward any set of proposals that adequately address what we consider to be the erosion of our members' pay due to inflation, or has sufficient progress been made on those local bargaining claims that were advanced under the previous public services agreement and are of significant importance to the terms and conditions of our members in terms of their pay and their job security.
Yeah, I'll just hold you there, David, for a second. Miriam, on that particular point, I suppose David's addressing the fact that we're out of an agreement now, at least in an interim period, and management will want to be changing practices and policies, and I suppose that's a unique thing. I mean, that doesn't happen very often. I think the last time it happened was the economic recession. So could you address that, maybe with a degree of dispatch, but could you address that point as an important one, I think?
Yeah, I do. We have been covered by successive agreements for a decade and a half. So many of our members have only ever worked within agreement and maybe will assume that things will continue to happen the way they have always happened. But as you mentioned, the last time we were out of an agreement was post-recession, and employers introduced a series of hostile measures against members and a series of policies, terms and conditions, new grading structures without any reference to the union. And we're trying to continue to unpack those. And many of the issues we're dealing with in local bargaining directly arise from employer decisions a decade and a half ago. So it might just be a word of caution to all members. Our branch activists will be aware of this, but if you see a policy being rolled out and you don't know whether it's being agreed or negotiated and you're a little bit unsure about whether it's fair, or if you see colleagues being brought in on lesser terms and conditions, again, just don't assume that this is okay or reasonable or legitimate. Please bring it to the attention of your branch committee, who will know whether this is something that is subject to negotiation and agreement or whether it is something that's being forced through while the employers trying to benefit from this period where we're out of agreement. Thanks
very much for that. Sorry for the interruption there, David.
Thank you, Robert. I think it's been touched on by both Frank and Miriam. On this matter, public service unions are coordinating their approach. The majority now are in the process of conducting or commencing the balloting process. In this instance, what we need and what we are seeking to achieve in conducting the ballot is a strong IFUT mandate that ultimately will strengthen the voice of higher education around the table and to strengthen our bargaining power. We need to send a clear signal to government that our members are organised, that we are prepared to take the appropriate steps to progress our legitimate and reasonable claims, and we need to give them a reason to move, and more generally, to move the dial on these issues with a view to getting progress. It may be perceived that IFUT is a small organisation compared perhaps with some of the larger public service unions. Mathematically, that isn't an unreasonable statement, but we are also growing. And it is a fact to say that we are the largest trade union operating within higher education and representing researchers, lecturers, and academics of a variety of different grades. You can't be all things to all people, and we are just here for the higher education sector and the academics and researchers and associated grades that work within it. And it is vital that that voice is heard loudly around the table, the same as any other occupational grouping within the broader church of public service workers.
Thanks for that, David. Miriam, I'll bring you in on this one as well, actually, if that's okay. David talks about strengthening our voice, and empowering the negotiators. So can you talk about like sort of how we organise and what we can do on the ground, what members can do, what branch committees can do to kind of assist in this regard?
Well, our branch committees are very active, and most of them at this time of year are planning how, when, and why to communicate with members, what events to have with members. But this might be a unique opportunity for us to talk to people in our membership who we don't get to see every day. So people who are on this call who have shown an interest in this issue, we would ask you to talk to your colleagues. If they're not on the call, if they're not aware of it, you might be able to allay their concerns or answer some of the issues that they have. And by doing so, you might facilitate them voting. They mightn't otherwise vote. They mightn't feel they have the information to vote. We'd ask you obviously to use your vote, but also encourage your colleagues to use your vote. And IFUT represents has a very good representative structure, and we have an awful lot of volunteers who give their time to branch activities. But in every institution we will have blind spots. There will be departments or schools which aren't represented. If you are in an area in your institution that maybe doesn't receive as many updates, or you feel like you don't have an avenue or access to the branch committee, please come forward and we'll talk to you about how we can rectify in the branch your representation so that everybody feels involved and is indeed involved. But really, it's talk to your colleagues, because people listen to their colleagues more than they will listen to somebody like myself or even the chair of your branch committee. They want to know what their local colleagues are thinking.
Thanks for that, Miriam. Back to you, David.
In terms of some practicalities, and obviously we don't know the outcome of the ballot at this juncture, we're just commencing the process. Should ultimately the result be a yes vote, which is what we are recommending in conjunction with our national executive, a yes vote in reality will mean that it strengthens our negotiating position. It gives the negotiating team support. A yes vote doesn't automatically mean strike action, and we will continue to work robustly with a view to seeking a negotiated settlement, which, as always, will remain our preference. However, at this juncture, there appears to be no such prospect on the horizon, so we must proceed with our ballot, the same as all other public service unions. While a yes vote does not automatically mean strike action, and it is our strong recommendation for the reasons that we've described that you do vote yes. I would not vote yes on the premise that it's not going to happen or it's unlikely that it will happen, because that does not assist in providing us with a mandate. So our recommendation is to vote yes for the reasons we've set out, and to do so on the basis that you are prepared to act in conjunction with your colleagues to take whatever necessary action, the specific form of that which will be determined at the appropriate time, with your colleagues to bring about a resolution to it. As I say, negotiation remains our preferred outcome. We'll continue to work towards that. But the National Executive of IFUT, our democratic governing body, is recommending a yes vote to our members. In terms of some practical matters, the ballot itself, members will be asked to support industrial action in favour of fair pay, local bargaining claims, and the protection of terms and conditions of employment. And I'll provide you with the question you will be asked in short course. But what we ask of you is to vote when you receive your ballot. All members of IFUT employed at publicly funded institutions are eligible to vote. And non-members are encouraged to join IFUT and will be eligible to vote if they do so before 5 p.m. on the 31st of August. So we ask that you do take the time yourself to vote, having considered the available materials in today's session. We ask that you encourage your colleagues when talking to them to vote themselves. And crucially, if you know of colleagues that are not members of IFUT, that you encourage them to join, because now more than ever, we need to stand together as a united voice within higher education to try and bring about a resolution and ultimately progress our terms and conditions of employment. I should say again, as I've said, at this juncture, only persons employed at publicly funded institutions are eligible to vote. The reason for that is because this is a dispute with the public service and the government, and that is the basis for that. But we are also conscious that we have a multitude of members in different institutions that are not publicly funded and are in private. And while at this juncture you will not be participating in the ballot, this is also very important to all of our members employed in private institutions, because ultimately the outcome of this is most likely to have significant bearing on terms and conditions in those institutions. And regardless of whether we are employed within a publicly funded institution or a private institution, this is all of our dispute within higher education. The balloting has been conducted in conjunction with our independent balloting partners, My Voice. They will email each eligible member a unique voting link on the 1st of September, which is the point at which the ballot opens. The link contains your unique voter code and can be used only once for obvious reasons for the protection of the democratic process. When you open the link, you will be asked either to vote yes or no on the following specific question. I am in favour of taking industrial action up to and including strike action in order to secure an acceptable increase in pay to cover the period from July to December 2026 and acceptable increases in pay to cover 2027 and/or the duration of any proposed agreement. To secure an acceptable approach to the following, including early conclusion of negotiations and full implementation of outcomes, which is claims lodged under the 3% local bargaining clause of the Public Service Pay Agreement 24 to 26, not determined or fully determined prior to the expiry of the agreement on the 30th of June 2026. And the outcomes of claims lodged under the clause not implemented or fully implemented prior to the expiry of the agreement on the 30th of June 2026, and to resist any imposition of changes to work practices, organisation of work, or organisational structures without the agreement of the union. So that is what you will be asked when you receive your ballot to vote yes or no on.
Thanks, David. We'll hold you there for a second. Frank, can I ask you to come in on that and just maybe unpack some of the balloting process for our members in terms of, I think Miriam spoke earlier, and indeed David did, about the importance of a high turnout. And then when you have a high turnout, a high percentage of yes votes, I suppose. So that's important from an organising perspective. But also constitutionally within the union, I guess we have some rules around turnouts. And you might also then speak to the fact of, or the point of, whether it's an aggregate ballot or whether each institution sort of declares its own result. So yeah, can we chat about that and tease that out a little bit?
Yeah, and Rob, you asked earlier, and I didn't respond about what was happening with respect to this across the public sector unions. Yes, right at the moment, all of the public sector unions are either balloting or getting ready to ballot, and it's expected that we'll have that all the ballots will be finished by the end of September. Now, yes, for ourselves, first of all, you're quite right. We're bound by legislation as to how we conduct a ballot for industrial action. That's the Industrial Relations Act 1990. But we have our own rules too, and we follow our own rules. We take, as everyone who's on this call knows, we take this matter very seriously. We mean the executive don't willy-nilly determine that we're going to ballot our entire public sector membership for strike action. So there's a lot of considerations that have been made, a lot of discussions and soul searching has taken place so far. But the rules reflect also how seriously we take ballots for industrial action. And we have a rule that says before we have to secure a mandate for industrial action, we have to achieve a 2/3 majority in favour of such action. So Some unions have similar rules. Some are 50% plus one, but that's where we are. So we need a strong vote in favour. We also, as you say, we need a strong turnout. You know, we would love, you know, to every ballot that we've conducted over recent years, no matter what the ballot has been on, we've increased turnout. But this is, we're driving this. This is particularly necessary that we maximize our turnout, and an opportunity, of course, as well, to do some, you know, housekeeping and ensure that our colleagues don't find themselves, our non-union colleagues or our not yet union colleagues, don't find themselves having to cross a picket. So it's an opportunity there to talk to them in advance, to sign them up, and to be working alongside them. The strong mandate is really important. Now, you asked about whether it's institutionally we're voting or across. We'll come out with one result, and that one result will be the result, the decision of our members in the public sector. So it won't be institution by institution. Our couple of institutions that are outside of the public sector are very much watching this because it impacts on them, but they're also supportive of this. And it might be worth noting that the students' unions have contacted me personally and said, what do we need to do? When do we need to do it? You know, which is, you know, a nice thing to have. I wouldn't have expected anything else. So the crucial thing is, yeah, we have one result. We feed it into the Public Services Committee, and hopefully the votes across all the public sector unions are similar or exactly aligned. And then the Public Sector Committee will make some recommendations to each union as to what form the action should take. But ultimately, that decision rests with your executive, with the IFUT Executive Committee. We're not going to depend on other unions to fight our battles in the public sector. We're absolutely standing on our own legs here. And yeah, we continue to do that. So we're really asking to maximise the turnout, maximise the membership, and to vote in favour. Give us the strongest possible mandate, because that will secure the best seats at the negotiating table.
Frank, you bring up a couple of important points, and I might just circle back to for a second. In terms of this being a multi-branch sort of call today, I suppose the aggregate ballot, you're very clear around that. But I suppose it is vitally important that each of the branches or each of the locations in and of themselves will turn a really high kind of yes vote, because we will have to serve industrial action notice if it's necessary on each of the employers. And we'll be calling on members to take action in each of those locations. So I suppose that's vitally important. But you might just advise people as well, in terms of the point you made around people joining the union. I think it's fair to say, maybe you might take this one, that people have been joining literally in their hundreds. And I suppose it's important that we continue to encourage people to sort of encourage their colleagues to join IFUT for that reason.
Yeah, Miriam mentioned earlier that we are, and I think Rob did too, or David did too, sorry, that we are the biggest union across higher education, and that was mentioned because it's a fact. There, as you say, members have been joining in their hundreds over the summer. It's remarkable. So I forget the last point.
So yeah, just in terms of declaring, I suppose, serving industrial action notice on each of the individual branches, it's important that each branch turns out a good mandate themselves.
Absolutely, no branch should feel outside of this. No branch that's affected. So maximise the attendance. We need the input from those branches, then, you know, into head office, through the executive committee, through your reps, and that's a two-way channel of communication as well. So yes, every branch has to be involved and feel involved, and let the employers know that we're involved, and that they're involved. Yeah, there's no passengers in this.
Thanks for that, Frank. David, I'll ask you to conclude your slides with a degree of dispatch, because maybe I've slightly played over time here, so I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Robert. So just again, some practical measures in relation to the ballot. If you don't receive your voting email, or if you encounter any difficulties accessing the ballot, please contact your branch secretary, the IFUT office, as soon as possible, so we can resolve the matter prior to the closing of the ballot, and that you will have an opportunity to have your say, because for obvious reasons it will not be possible to extend a facility to ballot beyond the stated time frame. The ballot opens on the 1st of September and it closes on the 22nd. At 12 noon, shortly or over the course of that day, when we have engaged in the appropriate administrative tasks and declarations and so forth, we will make an announcement towards the latter part of that day. Please take a few minutes to cast your vote and encourage others to vote. Your participation is essential in ensuring that everyone has a voice in deciding the next steps in this campaign, and ultimately we are stronger together. And IFUT's National Executive Committee recommend in strong terms a yes vote. Keep up to date with matters pertaining to the campaign. I've attached 2 QR codes to the slides there. You will see the first one is for you to join IFUT. Please share it with colleagues who are not members for the purposes of joining to ensure that they can ballot. The other one is to update your details. Obviously, our ability to communicate with you is contingent upon us having the up-to-date details for you, such as emails and phones and so forth. In conclusion, again, without labouring points or repetition, voting in this instance is really important. And it's very important that you have your say. This campaign begins with your vote. It is vital now more than ever that we stand together as a united voice across higher education, regardless of where you are at in your career or what your particular viewpoint is that this is all of our dispute within higher education, and it's vital that we now stand together, united and strong, to bring about a resolution to this matter. Thank you for your time and thank you for coming along today. The very high numbers that are in attendance is heartening. Please vote, stay informed, stay connected with us, and we'll continue to work on your behalf in conjunction with you to deliver a fair outcome and chart a pathway forward to a more favourable working environment in respect of terms and conditions of employment. Thank you for today.
Thanks, David. Thanks for that comprehensive presentation, and thanks to Frank and Miriam for their contributions. So if